I never thought my appearance would become a workplace liability until Karen from accounting decided it was her personal mission to make my professional life miserable. My name is Jessica, and I've worked as a senior marketing consultant for Hartwell & Associates for 3 years. I earned my position through late nights, successful campaigns, and a master's degree from Northwestern. But to Karen, none of that mattered as much as the fact that I was 28, fit, and apparently threatening enough to warrant her constant attention. Karen was 42, blonde, and the kind of woman who'd been attractive in her 20s and never quite accepted that time moves forward for everyone. She'd worked in accounting for 15 years, positioning herself as the unofficial office manager despite having no actual authority beyond her own department. She had a habit of inserting herself into decisions that weren't hers to make, criticizing younger employees, and making sure everyone knew she'd been there longer than almost anyone else. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story of workplace justice, please hit that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World. We bring you the most satisfying tales of entitled people getting exactly what they deserve. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this one ends. The problem started innocently enough. I'd been assigned to lead a presentation for a major client, a skincare company looking to rebrand for a younger demographic. It was a significant account, worth nearly $2 million annually, and my boss, Richard, had specifically chosen me because of my previous success with beauty industry clients. I'd spent weeks preparing, creating mock-ups, researching demographics, and developing a comprehensive strategy. The day before the presentation, I stayed late at the office, making final adjustments to my slides. I was wearing what I always wore for important meetings, a professional but well-fitted navy dress, modest heels, and minimal jewelry. My appearance was polished, appropriate, and entirely within company dress code guidelines. I've always believed that looking professional is part of the job, especially in client-facing roles. That's when Karen walked past my office, stopped, and backtracked. She stood in my doorway, arms crossed, her expression somewhere between disapproval and barely concealed irritation. You know, Jessica, some of us believe that professional attire should be conservative. That dress is awfully form-fitting for a business environment. I looked up from my laptop, genuinely confused. This is a standard business dress, Karen. It's actually from the same store where several other women in the office shop. Is there something specific about it that's inappropriate? She pursed her lips. I'm just saying that when I was your age, we understood that the workplace wasn't a fashion show. We let our work speak for itself rather than relying on other attributes to get ahead. The implication was clear, and it stung. I'd worked incredibly hard for every achievement in my career. My appearance had nothing to do with my success, and the suggestion otherwise was both insulting and unprofessional. But I kept my composure. I appreciate your feedback, Karen. Is there anything else I can help you with? She sniffed dismissively and walked away, but that was just the beginning. The next morning, I arrived at 8 for my 9:30 presentation. I'd printed all my materials, set up the conference room, and was doing a final tech check when Karen appeared again, this time with Sharon from Human Resources. Sharon looked uncomfortable, clutching a folder awkwardly. Jessica, I'm sorry to interrupt your preparation, but Karen has filed a formal complaint about your workplace attire. She believes it violates our professional standards policy and creates an uncomfortable environment for other employees. I felt my face flush with embarrassment and anger. I'm sorry, what? I'm wearing a business dress that's completely appropriate. I have a major presentation in 90 minutes. Karen interjected, her voice dripping with false concern. Sharon, as I mentioned, this has been an ongoing issue. Several employees have commented privately that Jessica's clothing choices are distracting and inappropriate for a professional environment. We have younger male employees who might feel uncomfortable, and as someone who's been here much longer, I feel it's my responsibility to address these concerns. Several employees? Who exactly has complained besides you, Karen? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. That's confidential, Karen replied smoothly. But I've documented everything. I think Sharon needs to review the situation before you meet with clients. Sharon looked genuinely apologetic. Jessica, I need to review Karen's complaint formally. It's policy. Can you give me 20 minutes? I promise I'll make this as quick as possible. My presentation was compromised before it even started. I spent 15 anxious minutes in Sharon's office while she reviewed the dress code policy, examined Karen's written complaint, and ultimately concluded that I was in full compliance with company standards. But the damage was done. I arrived at my presentation frazzled, anxious, and thrown off my game. I still landed the account, but it wasn't my best work, and I knew it. Karen's campaign didn't stop there. Over the next month, she found increasingly creative ways to undermine me. She sent emails to my boss questioning my expense reports, suggesting that my business lunches were extravagant. She started spreading rumors that I was dating clients, that my success was due to flirtation rather than competence. She made pointed comments in the break room about young women who used their looks instead of their brains. What Karen didn't know was that my background gave me resources she couldn't imagine. My father is a prominent employment attorney who's handled dozens of workplace discrimination cases. My mother sits on the board of 3 major corporations. And I'd spent my undergraduate years studying business law specifically because I'd always been interested in the intersection of corporate policy and legal protection. I understood exactly what Karen was doing, and I knew it was creating a legally actionable hostile work environment. But I wanted to be absolutely certain before I acted. So I started documenting everything. Every comment, every email, every interaction went into a detailed log with dates, times, and witnesses when available. I saved every email Karen sent. I requested copies of all her complaints from Human Resources, which I was entitled to under company policy. And I quietly started talking to other employees. That's when the real picture emerged. I wasn't Karen's first target. Over her 15 years at Hartwell and Associates, she'd systematically undermined at least 6 younger women. 2 had quit. 1 had been pushed out after Karen's complaints led to a negative performance review. 3 others had simply learned to avoid her, accepting the hostile environment as the cost of keeping their jobs. 1 woman, Jennifer, who'd left 2 years earlier, told me everything over coffee. Karen called me a distraction. She said my laugh was too loud, my clothes were too bright, and that I was unprofessional. She filed complaint after complaint until I just couldn't take it anymore. I was so anxious coming to work that I started having panic attacks. I finally quit, and I've regretted it ever since because I loved that job. I just couldn't handle her anymore. I realized then that this wasn't just about me. This was a pattern of harassment that had been allowed to continue because Karen was good at making her complaints seem legitimate, at framing her jealousy as professional concern. And nobody had ever had the resources or the knowledge to fight back properly. My father's law firm specialized in employment discrimination. When I showed him my documentation, his expression turned serious. Jessica, this is textbook hostile work environment harassment based on sex and age. Karen is creating conditions that make it difficult for younger women to succeed, and she's doing it deliberately. The company has failed to address it despite multiple complaints over years. You have an exceptionally strong case. But I didn't want to sue Hartwell and Associates. I liked my job. I liked my colleagues. I liked Richard, my boss, who'd always been supportive and fair. The company wasn't the problem. Karen was the problem. So I needed a solution that removed her specifically while protecting everyone else. That's when I learned something interesting from a friend in Human Resources at another company. Accounting positions, especially at the senior level, require bonding insurance. It's a type of insurance that protects companies against employee theft or fraud. And if an employee creates sufficient legal liability for a company, their bonding insurance can be revoked, making them essentially unemployable in any position handling money. I started researching Karen's professional history more carefully. Public records showed she'd left her previous 2 employers under unclear circumstances. There were no criminal charges, but the pattern was suspicious. Then I discovered something fascinating through a mutual connection. At her last job, Karen had been quietly asked to resign after an internal audit revealed irregularities in expense reimbursements. Nothing prosecutable, but enough that the company had decided not to renew her bonding insurance through them. She'd moved to Hartwell and Associates and somehow secured bonding through a different provider, likely by failing to disclose the previous issues. That meant she'd potentially committed insurance fraud in addition to creating a hostile work environment. But I still needed the perfect trigger, the exact right moment to deploy everything I'd learned. Karen provided it herself 3 weeks later. I'd been assigned another major presentation, this time for a pharmaceutical company looking to market a new women's health product. It was even bigger than the skincare account, worth nearly $4 million annually. Richard had chosen me again, and I was determined to make it flawless. The day of the presentation, I arrived at 7:30 in the morning. I was wearing a gray pantsuit, conservative and professional by any standard. I'd deliberately chosen the most understated outfit in my wardrobe specifically to avoid giving Karen any ammunition. At 8:15, 45 minutes before the client was scheduled to arrive, Karen walked into the conference room where I was setting up. She looked me up and down, and I could see the frustration in her eyes that she couldn't find fault with my outfit. So she found something else. "Jessica, I need to talk to you about your expense report from last month. There are several items that seem inappropriate. I'm going to need you to come to my office right now and go through each item with me." "Karen, I have a major client presentation in half an hour. Can this wait until this afternoon?" "No, it cannot. Financial compliance is everyone's responsibility, and these irregularities need to be addressed immediately. If you have nothing to hide, it should only take a few minutes." I knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to rattle me before the presentation, just like she'd done before. She wanted me anxious and off balance. But this time I was prepared. "Karen, my expense reports were already approved by Richard and by accounts payable. If you have concerns, you need to take them up with him, not ambush me before a major presentation." Her face flushed with anger. "Ambush? I'm doing my job. Maybe if you spent less time worrying about your appearance and more time following proper procedures, we wouldn't have these issues. But I suppose some people are used to skating by on looks rather than competence." She said it loudly enough that 2 associates setting up in the adjacent conference room definitely heard. She'd finally done it. She'd made an explicitly discriminatory comment, in front of witnesses, right before a major client meeting. It was so perfect I almost couldn't believe she'd been foolish enough to say it. I took a deep breath. "Karen, I'm going to proceed with my presentation. We'll address your concerns afterward." The presentation went brilliantly. The pharmaceutical executives loved the campaign I developed, and we secured the account with a 3-year contract. Richard was ecstatic. But I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. That afternoon, I requested a formal meeting with Sharon in Human Resources and Richard. I brought my father as legal counsel, which was my right under company policy when discussing potential legal matters. And I laid out everything. 6 months of documented harassment. A pattern spanning 15 years and multiple victims. Comments that clearly constituted sex and age discrimination. Creation of a hostile work environment. And most importantly, Karen's statement that morning, which 2 witnesses had heard and were willing to confirm. My father presented it clinically, like the experienced attorney he was. Hartwell and Associates has significant legal exposure here. Multiple instances of actionable harassment, failure to adequately address a known problem, and demonstrable damage to employee welfare. My daughter has been patient, but we now have documentation that would support a substantial lawsuit not just against Karen personally, but against the company for failing to protect its employees. Sharon went pale. Richard looked genuinely shocked, not because he doubted me, but because he'd never realized the full extent of what had been happening. "Jessica, I had no idea it was this serious. Why didn't you come to me sooner?" "Because I wanted to be absolutely certain of my facts. And because I was hoping to find a solution that didn't hurt the company. But this morning's incident made it clear that Karen isn't going to stop unless she's forced to." My father leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. Jessica is going to file a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. That's not negotiable at this point. The EEOC will investigate, and given the documentation we have, they will find merit in the complaint. That creates legal liability for Hartwell and Associates. He paused, letting that sink in. However, Jessica doesn't want to sue the company she works for. She wants to continue her career here. So we're willing to negotiate a resolution that protects everyone's interests except Karen's. Sharon found her voice. What kind of resolution? Karen's immediate termination for cause. A formal company-wide policy review and anti-harassment training. And a confidential settlement agreement that prevents Karen from making any disparaging statements about Jessica or the company. In exchange, Jessica agrees not to pursue litigation against Hartwell and Associates. Richard nodded slowly. If what you're saying is accurate, and I have no reason to doubt it, then Karen's termination is justified regardless of any settlement. Nobody should have to work in the environment you've described, Jessica. I'm genuinely sorry we didn't address this sooner. But my father wasn't finished. There's one more thing you should know. We've discovered that Karen may have committed insurance fraud when she secured her bonding through your company. She failed to disclose previous irregularities at her last employer that would have made her uninsurable. If that information becomes public, or if it's reported to her bonding company, she'll lose her insurance. And without bonding, she can't work in accounting anywhere. The implications were clear. Karen hadn't just created a hostile work environment. She'd potentially put the entire company at risk by obtaining bonding insurance under false pretenses. If anything had gone wrong, if there'd been any financial irregularities while she was inadequately insured, Hartwell and Associates could have been exposed to enormous liability. Sharon's hands were shaking as she made notes. I'll need to report this to our legal department immediately. If what you're saying about the insurance fraud is true, we have an obligation to notify our insurance provider. Of course, my father agreed smoothly. And I'm sure once they investigate, they'll make their own determination about whether to pursue it further. But that's between Karen and her insurance company. Our concern is resolving the harassment issue and protecting Jessica's career. The meeting ended with Sharon promising a full investigation and immediate action. Richard personally apologized again and assured me that my position was secure and valued. My father and I left the building, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months, relief. The next morning, I arrived at work to find Karen's office empty. Sharon called me in before 9 and confirmed that Karen had been terminated effective immediately, with cause. The company had acted overnight, probably terrified of the legal exposure they'd just discovered. Richard had personally reviewed the documentation I'd provided, interviewed the 2 witnesses from the morning incident, and spoken with Jennifer and 2 other former employees who confirmed similar patterns of harassment. But the real devastation came 3 days later. Karen apparently tried to secure another accounting position at a competing firm. During the routine background check, they contacted her bonding insurance provider to verify coverage. The insurance company, having been notified by Hartwell and Associates of potential fraud, had already begun their investigation. They denied coverage for her new position pending the outcome of that investigation. Without bonding insurance, the job offer was rescinded. And word travels fast in professional circles, especially in specialized fields like corporate accounting. Within a week, Karen had applied to 4 different firms. All 4 conducted the same due diligence. All 4 discovered the insurance issue. All 4 withdrew their offers. I learned this from Sharon, who told me in confidence because she thought I deserved to know the outcome. Jessica, I want you to understand that what happened to Karen was a direct result of her own actions. The harassment was real and documented. The insurance fraud was her choice. And the professional consequences are appropriate for someone who created the environment she created. You did the right thing by coming forward. But the perfect moment, the exact instant of Karen's realization that her world had completely collapsed, came 2 weeks later. I was having lunch at a restaurant near the office when I saw her walk in. She looked different, older somehow, with dark circles under her eyes and none of her usual confidence. She was dressed professionally, probably coming from another failed job interview. She saw me at the same moment I saw her. Our eyes met across the restaurant, and I watched her face transform. First confusion, then recognition, then the gradual dawning comprehension of exactly what had happened. She'd blamed me for getting her fired, certainly. But now she understood the full scope. The insurance investigation. The industry blacklisting. The complete destruction of her 15-year career, all triggered by her inability to stop harassing younger women she perceived as threats. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply held her gaze calmly, the same way I'd held it through 6 months of her petty cruelty. And I watched as the reality settled over her like a weight. She'd spent 15 years building a career in accounting. She'd positioned herself as indispensable, the veteran employee who knew all the systems and procedures. And now it was gone, all of it, destroyed not by my vindictiveness but by her own actions finally catching up to her. Karen's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her face went pale, then flushed red. Her hands, holding her purse, started trembling. She stood frozen in the restaurant doorway, and I could see the exact moment when she realized there was no coming back from this. No explanation she could give. No way to rebuild what she'd lost. She'd made younger women's lives miserable for years, and now she was facing the permanent consequences of that choice. If you enjoyed watching Karen's career crumble under the weight of her own harassment, smash that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World for more stories of entitled people getting the justice they deserve. Drop a comment and let me know what you would have done in my situation. Until next time, remember that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting someone's own actions destroy them.